Hey everyone, it's the Jork Gamesters for episode 4. It's me, Shamir. I'm here with my buddy Arjun, and here to talk about some games, anime, movies. Getting back to it. So I know Arjun, you got a lot of stuff on your mind that you wanted to talk about. So I'll turn it over to you, and say what's been catching your attention when it comes to the world of media.
Yeah, for sure. First of all, hey everyone, it's been some time. I think there's a lot going on in February. I can't believe we're already in the second month of the year, but definitely want to start off with Sony. There's been some rumors potentially about a state of play this upcoming week, and if that's the case, I'll be interested to know what's going to be announced. Is it going to be a big state of play? Is it going to be something to set us off for only the first 4 to 6 months of the year, or will they show off something new potentially coming down the line? There's been some rumors from Tom Henderson talking about potentially an unannounced studio announcing their game for their first time. So I'll be curious to see what happens there. But I'm curious to know from your end, what do you like to see if there's a potential state of play this week?
Yeah, yeah. So I actually, ironically enough, even before you brought this up to me, I was thinking about this during the shower. I don't know if this is just me, but a lot of times I just like really start thinking about video games and video game news when
No,
I'm just
did
taking a
he?
hot shower. No Diddy, but I was thinking about it, and I was like, like for so long, there's been so much negative press, towards Microsoft, and for one way or reason or another, we could talk about how that conversation is changing a little bit. And ironically, I think it is kind of their multi-platform strategy is causing them to get a lot less hate from people outside the Xbox camp. But now I'm seeing a lot more like kind of anger and like people like not feeling the same way about PlayStation, which is kind of weird for me because I feel like PlayStation has been the golden egg for so long, right? That like now I'm like, okay, there's like corners of the internet that are starting to express some dissatisfaction, right? And so I say that because originally going into a state of play in the beginning of the year, I would expect Sony to just talk about, things that are going to be immediately released, right? Like in the next 6 months, because I feel like that's normally their strategy. They really focus on just a handful of games that you're going to get right away that are really high quality. And I'm almost thinking back to now the state of play they had kind of early in the generation. If you remember the one with, I don't remember what year it was, but then they showed off Knights of the Old Republic, right? Their remake, and they kind of like hinted at stuff that was coming further down the line. So what I'm really curious about is with Sony, are they going to kind of do their usual strategy when they only focus on the next few months, right? Which to me would be indicative of a very confident Sony. Or are you going to see a Sony that is going to focus more as well on the future? And I think that's a little more telling. And it might actually be showing that Sony is starting to kind of take some of this criticism, to heart, and maybe they're even trying to push back a little bit and say, "Hey, like we're still Sony, like I know everyone is concerned about these live service games and things getting canceled and this or that, but did you forget who we are, And like showing some of the aces up their sleeves a little bit more because I know they have them. But to answer your question, I think what I absolutely am expecting, I think Death Stranding 2 is going to be on play because I really expected that near the end of last year, and it wasn't there. And we know it should be coming out on around now, right? So I do expect them to show that off. I do expect them to show off Ghost of Yotai. I think those are going to be like the two main focuses. And then after that, I think the big question mark is going to be, are they going to show off Wolverine? Because to me, like some of these other exclusives are probably pretty far down the line, right? Like whatever Sony Santa Monica doing and this and that. And in terms of like that potential like who knows game, like I have no idea. I feel like I couldn't even take a random guess what is this new studio and what could possibly shown. So I'm terrible at speculating. But I think for me, what I'm really gonna be curious to see is Sony gonna show off Wolverine? And like if they show off Wolverine, but it's coming out in 6 months, okay, that's kind of in line with their strategy. But they show off Wolverine and it's still no estimate on when it's going to come out. I think that's going to be pretty telling of what Sony's thinking.
Yeah, I mean, you made some really good points. I think this is not going to be a huge state of play. I think it's going to be a mid-sized presentation, maybe 20, 25 minutes long. I don't think we're going to see Wolverine. From what I've heard, I think there were rumors, or maybe it was confirmed, but I think the creative director either left or was dropped from the project last year, and due
Yeah,
to
I think he went to Perfect Dark.
yeah, due to some maybe creative differences, hard to say. So I don't know if the game is in trouble at this moment. But with Ted Price now leaving, he's basically saying that all the games are supposedly in good shape. I'll wait to see it before I
Yeah.
can. believe it. And then when it comes to what could they show, I don't think they're going to show Ghost of Yotai. I think they're going to want to wait till the summer to show it off because Death Stranding 2 was just rated by the ESRB in I think Korea or Taiwan. So when that happens, it's a good indication that it's like 3 to 4 months away for a game being released. So I think this is their first half game, so they don't want to take away from it. And then Metal Gear Solid Delta, the trailer was just leaked last week and it has not been officially acknowledged by
Oh, I didn't
PlayStation.
even think about that.
So most likely that was supposed to be at their state of play, and then someone accidentally uploaded it by accident too early, or it was automated to go up a week prior when
Yeah,
it wasn't
I feel
supposed
like
to.
that's kind of a strategy Sony does where like it'll be a third party game, but they'll market it so hard,
Yeah,
that, it seems like it's a Sony exclusive when it's
right.
not. And Microsoft tries to do the same thing. I just feel
No,
like
but
Sony is
they're
very successful at
but
that.
Microsoft is transparent. So when they just announced Ninja Gaiden or Indiana Jones, they said and PlayStation,
Oh yeah,
but just
even
coming
actually that's a
later.
good point. Even on the slide, it said PS5, and I
Yeah,
feel like sometimes like they'll only, I'll see like Sony trailers and they'll only say, "Oh,
yeah.
PS5 only,"
But
and
then
then
you'll get
later you have to go on the
a news
internet,
drop,
yeah, and then you check
yeah.
it's on the
So
Xbox.
it's stupid. But so with Metal Gear, the date was already leaked in the trailer too, and it says I think August 28th. So again, it gives you an indication that we're getting maybe the first 6 to 8 months worth of games potential in this state of play. So I think we'll see Death Stranding for sure, and I think Kojima or Hideo Kojima had hinted on Twitter that he was working on a new trailer, and whenever he does that, it's an indication of hey, something's going to show up sooner rather than later. So I don't think we're going to get Ghost of Yotai. I just don't think they want to get away from, or they want to get away from this. Plus, in prior years, when first party games have come out, they've had dedicated state of plays for their first party games,
You
like
know,
Horizon
you're right.
and Last of Us, and what other games have come out in the
Because
past.
you make a really good point. I feel like what Sony really does is like a 1-2 punch. They'll have like a banger in the first 6 months, a banger in the second 6 months, and then they'll pad that with like other things, right? So like last year they focused really on Final Fantasy VII, right,
Yeah,
and then Helldivers, right?
exactly.
I don't think they expected Helldivers to be as big as they thought
Yeah,
it would be, right? So that kind of surprised them. But their idea was, all right, let's just keep the news going for Final Fantasy VII because they probably want the news cycle to still be focused on that game even
yeah,
after it releases, right? For
right,
continued sales. And then yeah, think about it. Like Astrobot, they only talked about it like right before,
right before. And
right?
same with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. They did a dedicated state of play, 15
Yeah.
minute gameplay featurette. So I
But then it also makes me wonder then why did they even announce Ghost of Yotai or Death Stranding 2? You know?
I think the reason why is because they literally had nothing on their slate. So, like, this is a good way to transition the topic to two different things. One is, first of all, I think it's been basically seen with all the data in the last several months in the last quarter. Xbox is the biggest publisher on PlayStation by dollar amount, by revenue, which is utterly insane, though, based on the amount of games they're starting to release. And the second thing to that is they're now announced for Forza
Yeah.
Horizon coming to PlayStation, which would be hilarious if they announced another game at the state of play. Do you think there's going to be any Xbox published games at the state of play?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. But I was actually thinking about this as well. And, if you just list out the Xbox games that are coming to PlayStation this year, like that would seem like an insane year, right?
Yeah,
Because you have Forza 5 banger, Indiana Jones banger, right? And then, you have, simultaneous releases, right? So you have Doom banger,
yeah,
right? And Ninja Gaiden
Ninja
4,
Gaiden
which is
4.
technically Xbox Game Publishing
Yeah,
banger. And that's just what's been announced so
yeah,
far. And if, Elder Scroll Oblivion remake ends up becoming true,
yeah.
you got another one. Then you got
Fable potentially.
Fable potentially. Then Outer Worlds 2, I think, is pretty much
Oh yeah, it's
yeah, they've already
confirmed.
confirmed that that's going
Yeah,
to come out on the
PlayStation.
PlayStation. And then who knows what other ports you're going to have, right?
Yeah,
Whether that's a Gears collection.
Halo
So
potentially.
it's kind of ironic, but it's like, it's like the whole conversation of what our PlayStation players going to play. It seems like it's all
Xbox games.
Xbox games,
Yeah,
right? Or like even if they're not traditionally considered Xbox games, Microsoft now owns them,
yeah,
right? And so it's like I guess if you flood someone with enough good games and you just keep them busy,
yeah.
that's how.
I actually think some of these Xbox games might be better than Ghost of Yotai and Death Stranding. Like legitimately, I do think Fable or potentially Outer Worlds 2 or Avowed or they could all end up being easily
Yeah,
better. So like that's really interesting. So going back to my question, I don't think there'll be any Xbox published games announced at a state of play. I just don't think Sony would want to do that.
yeah,
They would wait till afterwards, a week later, saying again, "Hey, this game is coming out," drop it on their blog or something. They just don't want that their competition to get that
yeah. I really
spotlight.
don't know how PlayStation feels about all these games being released on their platform. Like how do they feel
Yeah.
about Forza and Sea of Thieves and all this stuff? And I feel like they're happy because in the short term it seems like, oh man, console war is done. We're gonna be milking even more money. But I wonder if we'll eventually reach a point where Sony will actively want to stop games coming to their platform from Xbox, right?
Yeah, well, I don't think they will because you're getting a massive cut. You're getting a 30% cut for
Oh
every
yeah,
game.
that's a good point.
It's free money, especially Call of Duty. They'd
Yeah, that's
rather have
easy
it.
money.
Yeah. Actually, now that I think about it, I'm going to take this back. I am going to put a Baja Blast on it. I think there'll be an Xbox published game shown off. I think it's going to be Indiana Jones because it's slated for spring of
Oh yeah, that's
2025.
a good point. I didn't even think about that.
They might show off the first DLC trailer for the game and then say it's coming out at the same time with the release of the PlayStation.
Oh
Or
man, that would be really good marketing.
yeah, and this is the definitive version.
Oh yeah, that would make so many people pissed off online.
I could definitely see that, and Xbox wouldn't
That's
care because
totally
it
a
would give them
Sony
more
move.
coverage.
That's totally a Sony move,
Yeah,
and
and
Microsoft wouldn't care.
Microsoft absolutely would not give a shit. They would go, you know what? We need as many people having eyes on this. So I'm taking that back. I'll put a little money on that. And then in terms of going back to your question earlier about like why has Sony been only showing trailers very close to the launch of games, and why has there only been a couple of them? Well, here's another thing to talk about. Herman Hulst has been demoted, so they just announced Hideaki Nishino has now the sole CEO of SIE. They basically demoted Herman Hulst to now be like the quote unquote CEO or president overall of their gaming division. But to me, like that says a lot because they just announced his co-CEO partnership last May. So it's only been
That's not
six
a long
months,
time, yeah.
and they announced it just prior to them canceling Concord, the God of War live service game, and the Blue Point
So,
game.
what do you feel like they're unhappy about with his work? Because you would know this better than me, but couldn't you like say a lot of that push was Jim Ryan, right? Like
Maybe.
not necessarily
Like
Herman.
they're gonna look at Jim Ryan as the guy who ushered the PS5 through COVID. Now, did he
Yeah,
sign off on a bunch of these live service games? Absolutely. But through a ton of leadership discussions with multiple people, but you could probably assume that Herman Hulst was steering that trip because he was the head of PlayStation Studios at the time. And he started that because we know when he took over for Shuhei Yoshida, he left 5 years ago just when God of War was releasing. So there wasn't that push yet for live
yeah.
service. So you can definitely say without a doubt, Herman Hulst was steering the ship for like 10 studios trying to go live service.
That's a good point. And I feel like Japanese companies are very risk adverse, right? So I feel like Concord probably really
Yeah.
bothered them, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, they probably looked at those numbers and how much money that lost, and Sony cuts their losses early,
Yeah.
and they pivot, like they're like, no, we're not going to try and
Right.
repeat that.
And now when you think about with Bluepoint and Sony Bend both just not having anything to show, unless they had two teams in parallel working, which I doubt because both teams were small, less than 100 people, they're going to have to wait another couple of years to get something on. This time they can't be risk averse. They're going to have to say, you're going to have to do something tried and true. Bluepoint, I bet you will do a remake this time. And I bet you Sony Bend might go back to Siphon Filter, or maybe they will do Days Gone 2 this time. Who the hell
Yeah.
knows? So otherwise, they're going to shut down one or two of those, or both studios. So I do think this is, you can put a lot of blame on Herman, and you can put a lot of blame on other people within the company for accepting that decision, and they have to live with it now. And they said, hey, this isn't working, and we want someone more business oriented as the CEO instead of Herman, who potentially pushed it and didn't say, hey, we're so risk averse that if we lose on all these bets, we might still be in a good position. And they weren't. Obviously,
Yeah.
they fumbled it super hard. It was the right decision at the time 5 years ago to focus on live service, but the way they executed it was horrible.
So I was just actually talking to a family friend of mine who's like absolutely not into gaming at all, but his son is really into gaming, and so because of that, I've noticed that he's gotten more and more interested in it and just hearing about it. And he talks to me a lot about like movies and like what kind of things he's looking forward to. And I was telling him, I was like, at the start of each year, I find it more interesting to look into gaming news and things like that than movies, right? And like I feel like now a lot of that like interesting conversation is gaming, and then after that it's TV shows, and movies are like the bottom rung. Because if you think about it, like the gaming industry moves relatively fast, right? Like for instance, like Jurassic Park, like the new Jurassic World movie, whether that came out this year or 3 years before or 3 years before then, like honestly, how different does Jurassic World
Yeah.
need to be, right? It's kind of the same thing over and
Yeah.
over again, and it works. But in gaming, like, and also think about how long it takes to make a Jurassic World, right?
Yeah.
Like you probably coming up with a script, filming it 2 years, maybe 3 years, something like that.
Yeah.
Great games are taking like 5, 6 years, and then onset of the idea, right? By the time you finished creating it, it can be a completely different landscape.
Yeah.
And so that makes it so hard to like know what to green light, right?
Yeah.
Because it could be like wow, like 180,
Yeah.
right?
It's funny you say this because I was just reading about Warner Brothers Studios and everything going on there, which has been an utter disaster with Rocksteady Studios, right, and releasing Suicide Squad. But more so, Jason Schreier just said as well that the Wonder Woman game, which was announced 3 years ago, is in development hell. So they basically rebooted the game last year. They've already spent over 100 million on the game with nothing to show. And the Nemesis system, which they were using for the game, which they had patented in the Lord of the Rings games, the Shadow War, Shadow Murder, is no longer being considered now for this reboot of the
That's
game,
crazy.
which is insane. So you have these studios that are literally fumbling. They can't get anyone else to take the IP or
Yeah,
license it, and they go either we double down, which is what this is where I can give Microsoft credit for. They doubled down. They said, "Fine, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it everywhere, and we're going to just give the best content we can." You
yeah.
have to sometimes double down. Like,
Yeah. Well, the thing is, like with gaming, like we're not game developers. I know, like since you're an engineer, you have a better understanding of this than I do. But I read online that games really only come together in the last 6 months of like the
a lot
last
of
year,
times, yeah,
right? And then the thing is, like with a movie, like I'm sure if you have a fire script, you show it to somebody and they're like, "Oh man, that's gonna be fire."
right.
Then you got a great actor on board, you got a great director on board, and you're probably fairly confident it's
Yeah,
gonna do well, right? Or you have these franchises where you just keep releasing things and you're fairly confident it's going to do well.
right.
But for gaming, like, if you're trying to, say, oh, yeah, it's going to be a banger, right? And it's 6 years into development. And now it's been it's been that long, and you're
Yeah,
like on the finish line. The game still looks like crap,
yeah.
because it's only going to come together in the end. That's kind of hard.
It is. Well, I'll say this: all forms of media are susceptible to the same concept you're saying, but it's less frequent in movies, especially when you have a good writer, a good script, a good actor, and a good director. They all normally work together well, unless someone's
Yeah.
toxic or
Yeah, because I
something.
feel like you can actually in real time kind of see how it's like growing, right?
Yeah,
As opposed to like a video game, like you'll be looking at like what the developers are looking at,
yeah.
and it's like just a bunch of like blocks.
Well, yeah, because it's the way gaming development works now. Like you said, it takes 5 to 7 years. It's segmented in so many different sections that the UI artists, the HMI artists can get together very late with the people with the underlying drivers, with the people that are developing gameplay. And when you put it all together, it comes out like a shitty peanut butter and jelly sandwich when they really meant it to be like a turkey sandwich. And it's like, bro, this is not what you envisioned. So
Yeah,
we need to like make do
pivot,
with what we got. Yeah, we got to
pivot.
pivot. So yeah, it happens more often in gaming because the parts are just so much bigger, and then they have to scope creep, right? So it's just interesting that again, I can give a little more credit to Microsoft for some of their decisions right now. So I guess the other thing too is that like with Sony again pivoting into PC a bit, another thing to talk about is Spider-Man 2, which recently released on PC, right? Which is a great thing. Some of their ports as of late have been good. That's what's been, I think, maybe holding people over a bit because they normally beef up the ports with a lot of PC features and people will double dip sometimes. But the Spider-Man 2 port has been so bad, apparently. There's been really bad reviews, stutters, crashes, even on high-end PCs, that it's like, guys, like
That's
what is
one thing
going
I
on here?
really just do not understand. Like, why is Sony having such a hard time with consistency when it comes to the PC, right? When, even if you're a Sony hater, you have to admit they have really good consistency with their first party games,
Right.
right? And why are they struggling so much in the PC space, right? Even and they have Valkyrie Entertainment, right? They have
Yeah.
like specific
And
studios meant
Nixies
for
and
just Nixie meant to just do this,
yeah.
right?
It's weird, man. And it's like I'm sure they give them such a small window to port that there's probably a lot of pressure. And when you take a really highly customized game for the PS5 and go, wow, like we really need to iron this out, it's just a lot of pressure.
Yeah. But like isn't it also kind of strange cuz like why are you in such a hurry, right? Like I understand like okay, PlayStation like we got to make like two bangers come out every year cuz that's what's our driving motivation. So you want to keep on that cadence. But if the game has already come out, like is
I,
anyone really going to be furious if Last of Us Part 2, remake 10 comes out 6 months later or 8 months later,
I mean, I
like
think it's data analytics. I think they looked at a bunch of trends and they said at a certain point past this, we're probably losing out and maximizing
oh, like
profit.
losing steam, like people don't care
Yeah.
anymore.
If you get to the 1, the 2, the 3 year mark, and then you release Spider-Man 2, well, by the time the sequel could already have come out, and then everyone says, I don't want to play this. I just want
Yeah.
to play the newest one. So I think they're looking at those trends and saying we need to get it out within 6 to 9 months or 6 to 12 months. And it's unfortunate because some games are so complex, like Spider-Man. We know how optimized that game is for PlayStation, specifically the ray tracing, all the fidelity modes. You got the different performance modes. You got all this stuff going on.
And I wonder if it's even their pipeline, because if you think about it, Xbox, PC, PlayStation, they should be fairly similar in their development,
Yeah,
right?
you would think.
And I wonder if, like, because for Microsoft, I imagine most of their studios, like from the get go, they're doing Xbox, PC together.
Yeah,
Like for Sony, it's
that's
like
why.
they're just doing PlayStation 5 for like 90% of the time. And
That's
now
why.
they're trying to tack on the
It,
PC version, right?
yeah,
Like,
that's exactly it. They should probably do both in parallel, but focus and have more resources on the PlayStation side. But if you do that, you're in a better position in the long run. You can
yeah.
take that extra time.
Well, ironically, I feel like that's the argument Microsoft's been making, because everyone like gives them crap for like the Series S, right? And
Right.
then they're like, "Well, you have to learn how to optimize, because if
Yeah.
you're able to optimize on the Series S, everything else will
We'll get
benefit."
benefit.
Look at Baldur's Gate 3;
Yeah.
they actually have split screen now,
Yeah.
which apparently was supposed to be impossible
Yeah.
with the 10 gigabytes of RAM,
Yeah.
VRAM.
VRAM.
They made it happen, right?
And
PC performance went up quite a bit.
yeah.
So in a
And
way,
Xbox Series X, they've already admitted that the bugs they found on the Series S that prevented them from releasing originally helped them find new optimized solutions to then cascade upstream to the other consoles. And they were like, wow, it actually made it more efficient and better running.
yeah, so I wonder if ironically, like if they had actually started from with PC in the first place, if the Sony games would be even better.
I
But
think so.
I mean, I'm
think
not
so.
saying Sony games are bad, because obviously they look freaking amazing and they
Yeah.
run amazing. But
Well,
if they could run even better.
Here's another example. So Square Enix just released Final Fantasy VII. Was it Rebirth or Remake on PC? Rebirth, I think.
I think it's Rebirth, yeah.
And again, that had mixed reviews. So while the features look great and they create a trailer to show all the great things, everyone's complaining about, again, stutters and crashes on a wide-ranging set of PC hardware. So it's like they do the same thing. They release their games like 6 to 9 months or 12 months now. And Square Enix is now saying they will prioritize more platforms going forward. So I think we'll get better ports as time goes on. But this is another case of you optimized for one hardware and now you're running into these issues. So
yeah, and I guess that's just kind of ironic, because back when I was a much younger gamer, like all of my older cousins were so PC centric. Like I just considered it was like you start off with a PC and everything trickles from there. And it feels like over the course of like 10, 20 years, like now it's the opposite. It's like you start off with a console and now everything trickles from there.
Yeah, that's literally, and that's why it's so weird, because sometimes you can keep throwing more resources and more power and more VRAM. It might not make a difference, right? Now it's just like, wow, this actually, the best experience is on a PS5 or a Series X. Like, sure, I'll just play it there. Very odd. It's very strange. And so that's another thing to kind of pivot into is, again, looking at Sony's strategy for releasing games. Like there's a particular example here where I think MLB The Show 2025 was just announced, and it's coming out. It's multi-platform, but it's not coming out on the PS4. But for some reason, it's coming out the Nintendo Switch.
Yeah, I can't even make sense of that. You think maybe Sony is just trying to convince people to make the jump at this point, because they're like, yeah, we got to move on past the PS4. We need to sell hardware.
I think so. I think Sony, because that studio was originally working with Sony for so long, they might be subsidizing the cost of development, saying we don't want people to keep playing on the PS4, but you might be missing on millions of sales. This could be your quote unquote system seller now, right? There's a subset of millions of people that used to play the show, and they go, frick, we need to go down to the PS5. It could sell 2-3 million consoles. And that's not the traditional system seller. Traditional system sellers used to be like Last of Us and Halo. Now people look at MLB The Show.
Ironically, I feel like as much as we kind of laughed at Sony for releasing MLB on Xbox Game Pass, I feel like by putting MLB on Xbox Game Pass, it got so much more attention and user base to start playing MLB, right? Because everyone was always playing, football and basketball, right? Exactly. No one was playing like baseball as much, I would say. I don't know, but and now, like, what happened? They pulled it off of Game Pass because they probably got the numbers and attention they wanted, and now they're like, all right, go buy a PS5 now.
Yeah, exactly. And what's funny? I think they've already released 3 versions of MLB The Show on the Switch already, and it runs like ass. Garbage.
I guess people are buying it.
People are buying it. And I'll say this, like, I'm an advocate of games releasing cross-gen more so than ever now. So in the past, I wasn't. I was like, I want them to drop the prior generations as soon as possible. But now that I'm ingrained in this stupid PC ecosystem with portable gaming, I want them to scale down as much as possible. So games will be available on Nintendo Switch 2. So they will be available on Steam Deck. So they will be available on every
Actually,
game.
that's a good point, right? Because if you have something that's just, like the crisis of the modern era, like that's not going to work on your handheld,
Yeah,
bro. That's
yeah, that's
unless you have one pixel, then
right.
you have like one frame and you're generating 29 with
Yeah,
AI.
with
Like,
like a multi frame generation, right, or something with NVIDIA. Like that's why I do want to say I'm the complete opposite now. So
yeah,
it's just like the same thing with the Horizon Lego game that came out, PS5 and Switch only, but not PS4. That game could have easily been on the
yeah.
PS4.
I mean, like, I do like it when it is just with the current generation because, then you're really pushing the hardware to its limits, right? Theoretically. But, I think a good enough developer can make it work, and I think that's just kind of the reality of where we're at now. I just want people to be gaming, and like
Mm.
I was just thinking about it, like, I've been, an Xbox fanboy for a very long time, and I know we've talked about how, really I kind of took an emotional hit when I was like, oh man, the Xbox I grew up with is not the Xbox I grew up with. I want to see Halo and Gears on everything,
Yeah.
And now I'm like over that and I'm like, all right, console war is dead. If you want to say PlayStation 1, be happy. If
Mm.
you want to say Nintendo 1, be happy. But now that to me, that conversation of the console wars is done, right? At least to me, I think the post console war, right, is a lot more interesting, right? Because we're starting to see, this like blurring of the generations. We're starting to see like moves to expand, gaming, right, to like people who wouldn't traditionally game, right? Like I have buddies of mine who aren't big gamers, but they're still gaming because they have their PS4s, right?
Right.
And they're like, all right, if this game's still coming out, I'll play it, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think two things. First of all, again, I'll bet another Baja Blast that by the time the PS6 comes out, there's going to be a triple cross generation game that's
Oh
PS4,
my
5, and 6.
god.
I will bet you.
Activision will do it.
I see
Activision will do it. They'll be
I
Call of
see
Duty.
it. I think yeah. It could be Call of Duty. It
Oh
could
my
be a
god.
football game.
If
It
that
could,
happens, I'm done, bro.
dude,
I'm done.
I think this is going to be the first time there's a triple cross gen game like that. So that's one. Second, to you talking about the console wars potentially being dead and over, I don't think that's the case yet. I still think Microsoft has a chance to really revive or really upskill this war, I guess you want to call it, or make it more of competition. And here's what I think, because I was thinking about this on my way over here. So I think if Microsoft comes up with a unique console um, reason in the next generation to convert and pivot more people to their ecosystem. So what I'm talking about is handheld, right? I've been saying that so
Oh
much.
yeah. Microsoft's gonna go hard on that.
I think if they make a handheld that allows you to launch PC launchers, so pay PC games, streamline your PC focus on the handheld, and basically say, here's the system for you to play third party games. And if they beat out Sony, because we know at this point Sony is probably also working on a handheld, you will now reset the paradigm and reset parity. So you'll say, hey, I'm going to get an Xbox handheld now for Xbox IP because we have so many already, and to play third party games portably because it's comfortable. I'm now going to continue getting a Nintendo console because I have Nintendo IP, and I'm now going to continue getting or still get PlayStation hardware because there's still PlayStation IP. So I still actually think there's a chance to reset the paradigm and reset parity to all three in the next generation, but they're going to have to go all in on a handheld. I think that's the only way. I don't
Yeah.
think releasing a powerful enough console will do the trick. I think it's supplemental this at this time going forward. So there's still a chance.
No, no, no. I hear what you're saying, but I guess the reason I'm saying that, and if you want to call it more of an evolution versus a revolution, that's fine, right? But for me, like as someone who's really been looking at the console race and how we're grading things and who's winning and who's up, how do I grade who's won at the end of the year, right? Like console exclusives don't mean what they used to.
Right.
Sales figures don't mean what they used to because just because you have more sales figures doesn't necessarily mean your bottom line is better,
Yeah.
right? I think if you want to reframe the conversation, instead of saying console wars, call it ecosystem wars, right? Just like you have the Apple ecosystem and the walled garden versus the Android ecosystem.
Yeah.
Absolutely true, right? Because Sony wants to keep people in their ecosystem because then they can make that profit off of the PlayStation Store, which is a big thing nowadays, right? Because if you think about it, the most successful person in gaming is Apple. And
Yeah.
what are they even doing? They're doing nothing, right? And they're making so much money, but that's because they're keeping people within their walled garden and their ecosystem. So I feel like in that way, like I can see the competition. But otherwise, like if Microsoft wanted to play like that game still, they could have just said, Doom and all these games, they're going to be exclusives on the Xbox for this year, and then their list would have looked like totally bangers. But like at the end of the year now, like how do I grade which console did better?
Yeah.
If the Xbox games are on PlayStation, and the PlayStation games might even end up starting to go on Xbox as well.
It's a good question to really think about. I mean, if you, again, to what you said earlier about like Apple and I think it was like Android, right? The market share between the two is almost split 50-50 in the US. Maybe it's like 47-53% or something. But the hardware, they almost support really similar hardware features. It's really about that ecosystem.
Yeah,
What
it's
can I,
keeping people in your ecosystem.
yeah, what kind of music can I play here? Like I have Apple Music, I have Apple Arcade, I have all this stuff, and then on Android I have some other things I can do. So when I look at Xbox, I think the things they need to focus on first of all to continue to keep people in their ecosystem is when they look at their hardware, it might have to be an evolution. And I think two things they should focus on is hardware accelerated ray tracing. They have to make improvements in that area. And I think they need to really utilize this new UDNA architecture from AMD because we know most likely Microsoft's going to stick with AMD and so is Sony. So again, from a hardware perspective,
You're making a good point because now I'm thinking about it. Maybe this is like an abstract comparison between like Apple and Android and Microsoft and Sony. But like, what is the walled garden going to be for
yeah,
Sony and Microsoft, right? Because think about it. Like, what are the most successful things right now? YouTube, right?
yeah,
Like Google could have made it just on Android phones, but they
right,
didn't. And look at how much more successful they are.
right,
WhatsApp,
yeah,
Facebook, all of these things are cross, platform, and they make so much money.
yeah,
So I think Microsoft wants to do that with their games because they realize like the big money is when everyone's playing,
yes,
right? And
yeah,
that's what they want to do under the guise of inclusivity. Yeah, that's true, but they
yeah,
also want to just make money.
yeah,
But then what is going to be your walled garden feature? And I
yeah,
think Sony, it's always been you are going to get the cream of the crop when it comes to your exclusive games.
right,
And I think Microsoft is saying, well, screw that. We just want to like have everyone play and make more money off of them,
yeah.
right? So what is going to be their walled garden
Exactly.
feature?
So that's when they kind of start, if you start focusing a little bit more on this next generation, again, on some of these architectures and saying, hey, maybe customizable architectures are no longer feasible if we're going to have multiple SKUs like a portable and a set top box like Series X. We have to go slightly different route. That could be your walled garden. Okay, it's unique enough, but overall, like you said, you're going to expand all the games to every platform possible. So there'll still be reasons to get the hardware in the next generation. And I think once we get through that point, which will probably be in 2 years from now when it starts, we'll have a better idea if they go away from hardware in totality when if they just say we just want to be a software publisher. We don't know
I
yet.
kind of feel like Microsoft won't do that because if you think about it, like, and I don't know the financial breakdowns, but I'll probably bet that Apple makes in a killing off of Apple Music, off
Yes.
of Apple Arcade,
Subscriptions.
off of the Apple Store. That's probably their biggest revenue driver,
Yeah.
and yet they're still selling iPhones, right? And so, with Microsoft, I can imagine they'll still be selling Xboxes, but they have to just figure out like what is the future about this that is going to make people stick with Xbox?
So I think 80 to 90% of people who have an Xbox have Game Pass, or I think 80 to 90% of
I
Game Pass
mean,
users are on Xbox hardware.
I agree with
So
you. I think Game Pass is a hell of a reason to stay in the walled garden of
yeah,
Microsoft.
so I think you're right. I don't think they stop the hardware because if they do, they lose 30 to 40 million subscribers. You would never want to do that.
Yeah.
Now the question is again, do they just pivot and say our main focus is a handheld and that's what we market going forward? Maybe. Nintendo has had to make those pivots in the last decade because they were losing too.
Yeah.
It's okay. I think if
I feel
Microsoft
like
does
they're
that's
going to pivot
okay.
hard into AI as well. Like,
Yes.
if
So sorry.
I was Microsoft, I'd be like, all right, we're going to make a handheld. We're going to make like basically a Series S that runs like a Series X, and it's
Yeah.
all going to be based off of AI, and it's
Yeah.
going to make you have a super seamless software
Yeah.
experience.
So that was the second one I wanted to mention was on top of maybe making some improvements in ray tracing was AI and machine learning upscaling. And I think if they focus on maybe potentially creating their own custom solution like Sony did with Pisser,
Wait, what's it called?
PSSR.
Wait, it's actually called
Yeah,
Pisser.
yeah, it's called Pisser. Everyone makes fun of it. If they do that, there's the innovation. But the is the juice worth the squeeze? I think it's going to be minuscule. Like we've made huge leaps from PS2 to 3 to 4 and now up to 5. It's going to be hard to get those same types of increase
Yeah.
in
I
hardware,
really
right?
wonder how AI upscaling is going to affect the next generation too, right? Because like this better than me, but like it's all based off of AMD, and AMD has pretty good AI upscaling, right?
It's all
But isn't
right.
like kind of like the leader right now in the space, like Nvidia?
Yeah, it's Nvidia still. Intel now has their own solution with XeSS, but it's all right. AMD is on the fourth iteration of FSR, but even with that, Sony still said we want to make our own solution. So it tells you that even Sony was
Yeah,
like,
they're not happy with
they're
it.
not happy with it. So I think Microsoft will come up with their own solution, and that's what's going to make the difference for their handhelds. And I think that's going to be a game changer. Honestly, you'll be able to play some really great games on handheld. You'll be able to play a Fable on handheld.
Yeah, that would be sick, man. I mean, like if they release an X, well, let me ask you this: if they release an Xbox handheld and basically Xbox Series X2, are you buying both? Are you buying one?
I think if they did that, I'm only buying one because I'll be able to get most of their games on PlayStation months later. And then if I really want to play, I'll just get the handheld and
Man,
play
you
right away.
are all in on the handheld life,
Dude, I'm
bro.
telling you,
All
it's so
in.
convenient. I didn't realize like how good it would be until I realized like, hey, if I just want to go to sleep, just play 30 minutes before you pass out. And if I do that consistently, it's better than me thinking about playing a game for
Yeah.
2 hours, 3 hours.
This is what I'm always telling you. This is how I get through my games. If you just play for 30 minutes a day rather than watching YouTube video about it for
Right,
30 minutes,
right.
you'll slowly work it through it.
Yeah, but it's more comfortable that I'm already in the position of sleeping. So if I'm literally have a blanket over me, I can play, put my game to sleep, throw it next to me, and just pass out right away instead of having to get up from my couch downstairs, walk all the way upstairs, get into the bed.
Oh my
That
god,
takes
your
an extra
life is
5
so
minutes.
difficult.
It is. It's first world problems, but I'm telling you, it's a pain. That's what unmotivates me from
I get
not
what
doing
you
it.
mean. It's kind of your barrier to get in, right?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. So I think that will be game. And again, we already have an example. Nintendo Switch has sold 150 million units. So there's no. It's not like there isn't any precedent. People fucking do it all the time. People have babies and kids. They'll be able to play. They're playing their Switch all the time while they're taking care of their babies. You know that people will do that. You know people take it on a trip to cross country or going out of state or wherever. So
I mean, it's gonna be so funny to me if the next generation is all handhelds. It's
yeah,
all like new Steam decks and new
yeah,
everything, and
it will be.
and people are
100%.
gonna have like four handhelds now. They're gonna have an Xbox, a Sony, a
It,
Nintendo, a Steam
Funny
handheld.
you say that. I already have 4 handhelds, so I'll probably have 8 by the time the next generation rolls around.
It's like collecting Infinity Stones.
Yeah, it's like the Infinity Stones, seriously. The other thing I wanted to talk about, since we're kind of on this topic about software strategies and expectations of sales, is with Bioware. I know we've talked about them so often in the last several months, but apparently Dragon Age didn't live up to expectations. It might have only sold 1 to 2 million units. And so as a result, Bioware has been downsized. So originally, reports came out in the past couple of weeks where employees were shifted to the team temporarily to other teams in Bioware or not Bioware and EA to support Dice and specifically Battlefield, which was just announced the new Battlefield game. However, now they've been notified that they're not temporary assignments; they're permanent assignments. A and B, Bioware is now has less than 100 employees working on the new Mass Effect game, and it seems to be not even into pre-production at this point, which is
Wow.
sad.
I mean, I guess with me, like, and I don't know, maybe I have an unpopular opinion about this, but especially with Bioware and Dragon Age, like the whole conversation around them just really pisses me off. Like, and I was really critical of Dragon Age Veilguard. When we talked about, it, I think in our first show, because I was talking about how the writing was inconsistent. To me, it's still my game of the year for last year, and I think a lot of people kind of give me crap about that. But even with the writing being inconsistent, it was still a good game. And like most writing in gaming is inconsistent.
Yeah.
But what kind of bothers me now, especially with like the social media age of gaming, is it's like somehow maybe it's the content creators, I don't know. There's like an overarching narrative of who's a good guy and who's a bad guy in gaming. And if it's someone who is a bad guy in gaming, then it's like a -1 for all of their releases. And then they have to like climb over a hill and go above and beyond expectations just to get your attention, right? And if it's the good guy of gaming, you don't even have to do much, and you're already getting like praise like thrown at you, right? So like the good guys of gaming, Baldur's Gate, right?
Yeah.
Helldivers 2, like a Kingdom Come Deliverance. And look, I'm not trying to take away from these teams as well, but I think people are walking into these games with these cognitive biases because everyone is hyping them up.
Yeah.
And like for instance, the bad guys of gaming, Ubisoft. It's like no matter what Ubisoft does, people are going to crap on them, right? And so many people are just destroying Assassin's Creed Shadows. Why do people hate Assassin's Creed Shadows so much? Because there's a black guy in it?
Yeah.
Like, have you guys played any Assassin's Creed games? Like, yeah, they're historical, but who in the world thinks that, like, this is the real world?
Yeah,
right?
who
Like,
thinks this is an accurate
literally,
representation
you're
of
in an
history?
animus and you're, like, reliving experiences based off your memories, based off genetic data, which is impossible.
Yeah.
And the first game, you're, like, dealing with, like apples of immortality and all this
aliens.
like ridiculous.
There's literally aliens in the third game.
I didn't even realize just absolute ridiculous stuff, and like you're pissed off because there's a black guy in the game. Like, Really? Like, okay, fine. Maybe it's culture and insensitive and you could have like better things, but like, are we all collectively just gonna give this game eternal crap and expect it to fail just or want it to fail just because of that? And then it's like a self fulfilling prophecy where I feel like, really YouTubers are just like profiting off of it because they're like, oh yeah, it's the death of AAA gaming. Let's like, make the self fulfilling prophecy that these studios and these games suck and they're gonna like, be tarnished, and then the games come and no one buys them, and then they do terrible, and then we hype up like the bad games, right? We hype up like the good people and the good games, and I guess I say all this in a roundabout way because as I've gotten older, I've realized like I should just play what I want to play.
Yeah,
Like I got Dragon's Dogma 2. Everyone was hyping up that game so much when it came out. It's just not for me,
which is
like,
fine.
and I convinced myself I would like the game because the graphics looked amazing and this and that. And I
Yeah,
played it and I'm like, dude, I hate Skyrim. I hate just
yeah.
exploring and finding what to do. I like Starfield. I like
I like a
going
story
from one
and
point to the
yeah,
other. I don't mind pressing
checklist.
button 3 times just to, fast travel somewhere. I prefer that rather than
Yeah.
stumbling around and discovering something I don't really care to discover.
Yeah, I know. I agree with that. Well, see, I think there needs to be just more demos in general before a game releases, so we get an idea. Because you probably spent $40 to $70 on Dragon's Dogma, and then you're like, I can't return this now.
Yeah, and I feel burned
Um,
because of that game, and now I feel like I have to beat it, right,
yeah,
to make up for the money. But my point is, like, Capcom is like the savior of like gaming right now, right?
yeah.
And so everyone's hyping their stuff up,
But
and
that's an example of a positive bias towards because they've
exactly,
delivered so much. So the cognitive or negative bias towards not only Bioware because they haven't delivered in the last 10 years, but also EA. So that's it's
yeah,
compounded times two.
exactly. I get what you mean, but like the amount of hate people have towards Dragon Age, it's like it just keeps echoing in an echo chamber. And I could argue like as angry as people are at Dragon Age because the chosen consequence of old Bioware is not there. I can say I'm really pissed off about Dragon's Dogma, not because they didn't give me what I expected, because it really is Dragon's Dogma 1 but better, but because I was misled and I got something that I didn't want, right? And I could just be really pissed off about that. But it's like, dude, it's a game. It's someone's creative project. Like they don't owe you anything,
Yeah,
Like if this is what they wanted to do and you don't enjoy it or vibe with it, go somewhere else, bro.
yeah. No, I agree. It's just that people have limited time and money and resources. So if someone's going to hype up this game that's being talked about, like Dragon's Dogma when it came out, it sold like 3 million units within the first month. Everyone was talking about it. So I I'm going based off other people's perceptions to make my decision, hopefully an informed decision on what games to buy. But it sucks that it doesn't turn out to be the game I wanted.
Yeah,
So I
but
think I
but
have
my
to level
problem is
set
you don't
too.
hear contrary opinions.
Yeah,
Like most of the stuff you hear is just like
it's an echo chamber.
is an echo chamber, and if someone has a contrary opinion, it's like
You'll barely see it. You
you'll
barely
barely
find it.
see it, or like you're not really gonna have like a conversation. Like,
Yeah.
oh, I love
Actually,
Dragon's Dogma. I hate Dragon's Dogma. Let's talk about it.
it's actually interesting you say this because this does pertain to Dragon Age. But okay, when the initial previews came out, Mr. Maddie Plays talked highly of it. It was this chunk of gameplay. When he reviewed the game, he shat on it absolutely. When other people were talking greatly of it, and it was fair because he's like, "Hey, this is just the type of game I'm not looking for from a Bioware game." But I don't. I think he got so much shit for it. People were like, "Oh, maybe we will check the game out because we don't believe what you're saying." It was some. It was really weird about
Yeah,
how that went about, or maybe his negative perception of the game actually influenced people not to get it. It was hard
yeah,
to say. But it's interesting because he was like one of the only few that was very outspoken about it. I
yeah.
couldn't find a whole other
I mean,
a
that's
lot of
one thing. Like,
outlets.
with me, like, I still really respect Mr. Manny's plays opinion. I really disagree with him on Dragon Age, and I think the main reason he feels as strongly as he does is he's like a hardcore Bioware fan and old school Bioware
Old
fan,
school, yeah.
and he likes that type of RPG. But for me, like, I did not like Baldur's Gate 3. Like, I didn't even want to rank it in my top 10 because
Yeah.
to me the pacing is terrible. It's such a slow game, right?
Right.
But other people will say, man, that level of choice is amazing. Like,
Right.
I want that choice and consequence. I don't care for that choice and consequence. I just want a good story.
Yeah.
I don't need to craft my own story. And so that's what I mean. Like, different strokes for different folks, right?
Yeah. Did he?
But no, I mean, I say all that because to me, like, Dragon Age is kind of, a victim of that because even if there are some things that I'll agree are objectively wrong with that game, I went in length about it in the first,
Yeah.
episode. Like, there is inconsistent writing. I think they really tackled a difficult topic, with like trans issues. And, to me, I'm happy to see that representation, but I still stand by what I said. Like, if you're gonna tackle a very divisive topic, I'll applaud you for doing that. I think gets boring if we are all playing games from the same perspective of the same protagonist, right?
Yeah.
And so different perspectives, I'm always going to be up for that because that's interesting. But if you're going to take on a divisive topic, make sure you assign your best writer to it,
Yeah.
And I just felt like that story, like that side storyline with Tosh, just did not have the
Yeah.
best writers. And I know there was good writers on that team because some of the dialogue that you have for Rook is actually really well done, and some of the interactions you have with some of the characters are really well done. And even Mr. Matty's, and a lot of people will say, well, I think his name was Emmerich, the necromancer. That was such a fascinating twist on your traditional necromancer,
Mm.
right? Really good writing for his side storyline across the board. And yet people are acting like it's all bad when it's not. It's a mixed bag. It's good and bad. So I say all that because I'm really disappointed to hear this news because yeah, Bioware got gutted, man, and like at least that's what it looks like. And EA, they're going to be very unhappy about these things, and I think it's stupid to kind of save face and say that it's because they didn't have
A live service
live
elements,
service. No,
which
it's
is basic.
not. But they're trying to save face.
Yeah, they basically came out and said, "Hey, maybe if we had gone live service, this is what the audience wants," and everyone's like, "No," because before I get to this topic, if you look at Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 sold 1 million within the first
Yeah.
couple of days.
But I also think
That's
that's because people are hyping that game up. Like, look, Kingdom Come Deliverance objectively looks like a very good game, but I
right.
think it started off the conversation with a +1.
Yeah.
When I was watching
100%.
like people talking about the trailers for that game, or people even anticipating what the game was going to look like. It's like like people love it when a niche game goes mainstream, right?
Yeah.
And so like people were already hyping it up before we even got much.
But
right?
think about, okay, you're right. It got a +1, but think about if the game didn't deliver when it released with all the hype that also could have potentially crashed and hit rock bottom too.
Yeah.
So they're lucky that it delivered
Yeah,
the way
no,
it did.
I mean, and I give kudos to that team, but I guess for me, like, and I know you asked me this the other day, like, I'm looking for a new game, like maybe I should get Kingdom Come, and no, I'm not gonna get it
That's
because
fair.
objectively the game looks terrific, and from what I hear, the writing seems very strong, right, and that seems like it's up my alley, but I just don't want to invest in an 80-hour game where like a lot of the fun is like this Skyrim like exploration
Yeah.
because that's not for me.
Yeah.
I want to go straight through the main path.
That's fair. I mean, I guess that's so another thing related to Bioware that now with this downsizing, the director left. I forget, the director just got a job. I forgot what developer, but overall, seeing with what's happened to Bioware, are you excited still for a new Mass Effect game,
Oh,
or
absolutely.
would you rather them cancel and just
No,
shelve it?
absolutely. I'm still excited for it. And I mean, like, I think, like, we want to create these narratives where, like, oh, doom and gloom, because, like, that, like, activates our amygdalas and we get, like, oh, so, like, hyped up and such sensationalized about it. But I think for me now, I just want to, I just want to live in these fantasy worlds that I love,
Yeah.
And so, like, to me, like, even if the next Halo comes out and it's not, like, the most amazing thing on the planet, like, at least what I love is continuing, right?
Yeah.
And so I feel the same way with Mass Effect, and not everyone's going to feel that same way. Like some people are just going to want to live in the nostalgic memory of what was amazing, right? But for me, I'm like, I feel like I've been around long enough. Like obviously, I'm not like 60, but I've seen the death and rebirth and eventually, full death of enough franchises that to me, like, if you're still able to like have that franchise be a part of, the culture, right,
Yeah.
and like people's conversations,
There's some nostalgia still.
I love that, because like really a lot of these franchises just die and they never come back. Like Resistance, like it's died and it's never come back.
Speaking of, Ted Price just announced they had an interview with Kind of Funny. They pitched Resistance 4 to Sony and they got shot down.
Right, and it pisses me off. I'd love to play Resistance 4, but
they said they'd also spent a lot of time fleshing out the whole backstory for what a fourth game could have been and the origins of the Chimera. And then he's like, I was very disappointed we couldn't go forward with it.
And, I think eventually Sony will pivot back to that because they'll realize they have a banger and it's, why did they leave it? But, like another thing you think about, like I have a niece now, right? And like she just turned 3. She loves Spider-Man. And it's like now I'm starting to, enter that zone where it's like, oh man, the things I loved, I'm seeing like,
Another
the new
generation.
people I love those things.
Yeah.
And like now I know how like, I don't have kids yet, but like how people with kids feel and when the game with their kids. And so to me, like bringing it back to Mass Effect, if they can do another Mass Effect, right, and it does pretty like it's good, then I'll be happy. Now, like if they release a Mass Effect and it's trash, then of course everyone's going to be pissed.
Well,
but to me, like I expect like a bare minimum of quality. Like even if it's an 8 out of 10, like I'm gonna be happy with that. I don't need like a
Yeah,
9 or 10 out of 10.
look, I think
And
based
like
on
objectively, to me, Dragon Age is an 8 out of 10.
which is a
Veilguard,
solid
right?
game. It's a solid game. Can't complain. I just picked it up for $25, so
Yeah,
I cannot complain about that. I will probably keep it. I will not trade it in for that cheap. I'll keep it. I'll say this about the studio going forward. Obviously, I'm very concerned with the downsizing, but if they're not in pre-production yet or they're barely there, it makes sense to optimize your resources until you ramp back up and get into production. I think twofold. I think there's a good possibility Mass Effect never gets released. I think if they take too long to figure out what the direction of that game is, based on what they've now seen with Dragon Age, and maybe if they're asked to incorporate live service elements, there's a potential that they never get off the ground potentially with this game. That's one. And even if they do not meet financial expectations, I think they officially get shut down. I think Bioware will no longer exist after Mass Effect if it's not a big hit. And by big hit, it has to be like a 10 million seller
yeah.
type of game. It can't be a 5 million, can't be a 7 million, can't be a 3 million. It has to sell a lot enough for them to make sequels to. There is no way because
Yeah.
if they take another 5 to 7 years to make another game after Mass Effect, they're screwed. They're gonna
I
have to
think
build
what
upon
they're
this game.
doing, I mean, I would think what they would do is just a really massive swing, right? I don't know. I mean, I just can't see Bioware being shut down. They just have such a long history, and like you saw, honestly, I think if it gets to that point, someone buys them out because like if there was enough love for Hi-Fi Rush that someone swooped in and bought them, and they were like, honestly, we don't even know if this would be financially viable, but we just couldn't let it go. I can't see like Bioware just dying. Like I feel like
It's
Sony or Microsoft or even Tencent or someone will swoop in because that name alone, even those franchise names alone, like even if EA is like dead with it and done with it, like someone is gonna pick that up.
I don't think so. I think what will happen, the reason why Hi-Fi Rush got picked up was that for the most part, that team that made the game was still intact, and they picked up all the same people. With Bioware, over the last decade and more, especially since Anthem was a failure, so many of the veterans have left, and even the B tier talent they had that was there a decade ago, they're slowly going off to other projects within, like I said, Dice and Criterion and whatever. So that's like they will shelve the studio, in my opinion. They'll hold on to the IP.
And then get a new studio to make it.
Yeah, and
You know,
potentially
honestly, you
rebrand.
might be right with that because like I don't think I can think of, and maybe we'll have to think about this. Like, was there a franchise where like everyone was leaving and they kept trying to make it happen and it didn't, and they just kept going with it, or
Right.
because the only franchise I can think of is Halo, right? And it's
Yeah,
like
Halo
they tried with
literally.
343, they tried with Halo, and even Halo Studios, and even though I still love every Halo game that's come out, like objectively, I can say that like people are not happy with the quality.
Yeah, but think
And
about it this way. They did incorporate live service elements into that game by making the multiplayer free to play. And
yeah,
then
that
guess
didn't
what?
work out for them at all.
It didn't, but they announced that since the launch, they had millions of people at least try it.
Oh
So
yeah.
that probably means they at least made their money back to some degree based on all the microtransactions. I wouldn't be surprised if they're like, if we didn't even get close to that, we could have can't like closed this whole studio down. Like you never know, right? But
I will say the numbers on Halo really confused me because like, you know, as far as I can tell, there's like no one really updating Halo Infinite, but it's still getting a lot of content, and it's pretty much all Forge people.
that's what I'm
Like,
saying. It's
I don't know if you
insane.
saw, like
It's
they
literally bare
basically made a
bones.
fuel rod spanker, and like the thing is, it's bare bones, but somehow they're still delivering
I
objectively
know.
a lot of content because
It's
there's
strange.
like I haven't played in a long time, and like I put in like probably like 200-300 hours. I played that game so much, and there's still like a bunch of new modes to
Yeah.
try, right? And somehow they're still updating it, but I really think for them it's Forge,
Yeah, it has. Look, this game is so unique. No other game has a community like that where you can create assets and modes and games and keep the community alive. So they're in such a unique position where they literally don't have to touch it
Yeah.
for months on end and they can continue to focus on new Halo projects. But there's no other fucking game like that.
Yeah, and honestly, you say that when you say that, like I really don't know how it's going to be for Mass Effect because I can't think of a franchise in a studio that I could look at and
Yeah,
compare. I mean, to me, I just think Bioware is such a legendary name,
it
because
is or
honestly,
was.
Bioware is the reason I got into RPGs, and I'm still happy with Dragon Age Veilguard, so I really want to see a new Mass Effect.
Yeah.
But man, if they got canned, oh, that would be a depressing day for me.
Look, I still haven't played the original three Mass Effect games. I have it now on.
Wait, did you play the first one?
I mean, I've played it for like a minute when I was a kid, and I bought the trilogy, so I have it on Steam, and I have it on obviously Game Pass. So I will play it one day. But like, and I've seen my brother play it, so it looks fun. I think it's a game I'll get into for sure. but I don't have an attachment to it. So even if it never came out, the new Mass Effect, I'd be like, because Andromeda didn't have any hype either, and I was just
No.
like, yeah, sure, combat was good.
I think for me, like Mass Effect One is like top 10 game. Like I love Mass Effect One. I think most people say two is better. Probably almost everyone,
Yeah,
but
almost
man,
everyone.
one just was too good
Well,
for
for
me.
the time of its release, what it did, the way it looked, the actual RPG elements, like there was depth to that game. I was shocked. Like that game released what early, like
Like
2007.
2006 or
That's
2007.
insane for a
No,
game
I
to come
think
out like that.
actually 2008 because I think it came out after Halo 3. Yeah.
Yeah, that's insane for a type of game like that of that caliber to release back then. Insane,
And the
utter
thing is,
insanity.
like, actually, if you think about it, like, how many really big, like, sci-fi story-driven
Not a lot.
games are there? There's really not a lot
Not a
because
lot.
there's not a lot of big story-driven games, right?
Yeah,
And so I
and
think that's like a big niche, like that, and like honestly, like spy games, right? Like that's why
yeah.
I feel like Cyberpunk was successful, but like there's just not enough of those
Yeah,
games.
there's not. But I'll say this: EA has done a good job in giving Bioware a lot of chances. They gave them a long leash, and in other examples, when they did Anthem and how poorly that was, like it wasn't meeting their expectations. It still sold 5 million units, okay,
That's
mind you.
insane, yeah.
But at the time, they had like a 10 to 20 million expectation. It was crazy. But
Well, I also
what?
think it's these
But
people who just have these like these crazy
yeah,
expectations.
like a Square Enix, they're all stupid. But my point being is they even gave him a chance to reform and completely redo Anthem, and they called it Anthem 2.0. It was like a new initiative, but they took so long just to change some UI elements. They're like, okay, we're gonna have to spend hundreds of millions of dollars for you to remake this game? No way. So they canceled it, but they at least gave them the chance. They
Yeah.
checked in regularly, gave them frequent updates. They're like, no, this isn't working. It's taking way too long to change it. It would have to be a brand new game.
Yeah, I guess like kind of in an ironic way. Like I feel like the gaming industry has went back to where they used to be. Like we really are going back to like what was working in the early 2000s, right? Like story driven games or
Yeah,
like games that aren't like $500 million to make.
yeah,
Games you can release more often, like games that are like
yeah,
maybe even 10 or 15 hours.
yeah.
And
Look,
I like that change.
I like the change too. I can't keep having a backlog of 200 games when each game is 80 hours long. I can't do that. You give me a game that's 10 to maybe 20 to 25. I think Avowed is going to be like a 20-hour game. That will be perfect. That's what
Yeah.
I need. I can beat that in a year. I can't do an 80-hour game like Kingdom Come. And
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like I'm happy you brought up Avowed because I'm very excited for that to come out. What's that? How many days away is
I
that?
think
Like
we're
a week and a
a
half?
week and a half, 217 early access or something.
I thought it was kind of funny. Like I didn't watch the whole interview, but they interviewed the director of that game, and she was basically saying, "Yeah, there's gonna be some jank, but you need some jank in
Thanks.
order to make the game creative."
Thanks. Well, you know what's funny?
It's like at
So
least you're being honest.
look, here's what I can say is the interview they gave, I think, to what's it called? Incognito and Mr. Matty Plays last November. They said they weren't going to have 60 FPS when it releases, and guess what?
And
They
they made
just
it happen.
confirmed. Yeah, they're doing 60 FPS on Series X. So, again, for them to put in all this effort to polish it and provide all these options, like I am really curious how this game performs. And they already have, like you said, two games releasing in a single year. So I think overall, regardless of how well they perform financially or commercially, like this is an achievement in and of itself. And
Yeah.
we need those types of games from Microsoft.
And I'm happy you brought that up too because Obsidian, right? Like Obsidian for a while was kind of struggling. It's not like they were doing bad, but because like they didn't have like a good financial backing,
Yeah.
right? And now that they're on the pipeline of Microsoft and unlimited money, like look at how many games they've released.
Yeah.
And I say that because I know this would probably not happen, but in a world where we're dreaming, and I was thinking about like the next acquisition for Microsoft. Man, I feel like a really good fit for them is EA. I know it sounds ridiculous and it sounds massive, but think about it. Microsoft wants games that are easy to advertise that everyone wants. Why did they buy Activision? Where it was like $69 billion, something ridiculous, because Call of Duty is going to be a household name,
Yeah.
right? EA has household names. They have all the sports games,
Yeah.
Madden and all. It's
FC,
not FIFA, but now
Football
it's
Club.
FC, and so like Microsoft wants that because then they can advertise like football, Call of Duty, and then boom, there you go, and you would have one company own Battlefield, Halo, and Call of Duty.
Get out. And Gears.
Yeah, but like that's like literally what we grew up on. Can you imagine one person have all
One
three of
entity.
those? Yeah, all three of those shooters, and then I feel like the studios that are maybe struggling for one reason or another, like Bioware. I actually feel like maybe with Microsoft, helping them out, maybe that can start achieving more because Microsoft has been kind of good for that for some of their studios.
They have, but again, even if they took over EA, they would immediately try to consolidate as
Oh
many
yeah.
groups as possible to focus on the things that make them the most money. That's what they did as soon as they took over Activision. They laid off 17 or 20% of the workforce and said, hey, you guys are all going to help with these studios. Even if we give more time for Call of Duty games going forward to help with that, we'll try to revive some dead IP, but we'll selectively choose
Yeah.
one or two developers
I mean, the
within
thing is,
Activision.
like, yeah, those, from a consumer perspective, that might piss us off, but sometimes you do have to make those hard decisions,
Yeah.
Um, and like, I give Sony a lot of crap, and I'm really pissed off with them for, canceling Order 1886,
Yeah.
right? And stuff like that. But sometimes you got to make those hard decisions, right?
I
And look, I don't think Microsoft's going to buy EA anytime soon, but look, like, if Microsoft is really big on making the Netflix of gaming, like, 10 years from now, what's going to happen if Microsoft is still doing the Game Pass game, right? And like Game Pass has been around for a while and you really want to take it to the next level, Activation Blizzard. Oh man, can you imagine EA as well?
Look, you know how many discussions there's been about someone acquiring Nintendo? Disney wanted to acquire Nintendo.
Oh
That
my
just came out.
gosh.
Microsoft wanted to acquire Nintendo.
Nintendo's never selling.
Sony wanted to partner with Nintendo 25 years ago to make a console. Dude,
You think EA will never sell?
I don't think EA will ever sell.
I mean, I guess EA is in a good financial position. Like,
Yeah.
Respawn has been doing good for them. Their sports games have been doing good for them. I know Ubisoft is the only one that's going to probably be bought out.
Well, and what's the indie studio that they created for Joseph Ferris?
Yeah,
Hazelight Studio.
Hazelight, they've been doing.
They're doing it like
EA surprisingly has been doing pretty.
Yeah, they've changed the stigma around them in the last 10 to 15 years. So I don't really care where EA goes. My thing is, I think Mass Effect will be released. I think this new one will get out the door within, I say, when PS6 releases and the new Xbox releases. So I'll say 2027 at the earliest.
Oh yeah, it's going to be far out.
And I think it's not going to meet expectations, and I think they're going to get shut down shortly after. I just see it. They've gotten too many chances. This Bioware is not the same Bioware we once knew, and it's time to put them to rest. I just don't want to hear about them anymore.
You really hate Bioware.
I don't hate them. It's just, if you're going to keep putting out stuff like controversial shit like games and Dragon Age where the writing is so controversial and then you can't back it up and then everyone leaves and then you talk shit up to people on Twitter, like, okay, just die already. Like, we don't need these shitty games that sell 1 million units because most people are going to say it wasn't even worth it to begin with. They remember the older stuff better than the newer output. So people will always remember that. And we have remasters of all the old games. So that's what I want to remember them by.
I mean, I guess I give Bioware a little more credit because with me for Anthem, I don't think I can really blame them for Anthem. I really feel like that was just the management at the time. Like, for instance, like, how hard can you be on, Sony Bend, and how hard can you be on, Ready at Dawn, and how hard can you be on those studios when, management is pushing them in a certain direction? Yeah. Or even with, Microsoft, like, look at what they did to Fable. How hard can you be on Lionhead Studios when, what the heck were they doing in the last couple of years,
Peter Molyneux.
Yeah. Sure. So I don't know. I mean, I guess maybe I just love Bioware too much, and I give them too much credit. But
again, you're in love with an older Bioware. You're in love with the idea of what Bioware could put out because what they've done.
I've been pretty consistent. I mean, I still love the new Dragon Age.
Look, it's like
my game of the year.
Look, it's like saying you like cheesecake, but they don't put cheese in cheesecake anymore. You go like, I love the idea of what a cheesecake used to be.
They don't even put cheese in cheesecake. What are you talking about?
They put cream cheese. What are you talking about?
All right, fine.
But instead they filled it with peanut butter or freaking grape jelly juice and some shit. And you're like, wait a minute. I used to love it. I want to keep eating it. It's not the same cheesecake that it once was. That's what Bioware is. It's a shell of itself. They no longer have almost any of the veterans that were like came up with the concepts of Mass Effect and Dragon Age, the ones that were very popular that sold well, even up to Dragon Age 3, which was controversial.
But should we expect that from any studio? Because if you think about it, like, if these games
Naughty Dog.
5-6 years to come out, I mean, but like, even with Naughty Dog, a lot of the big people have left.
Yeah, but they've maintained enough talent since their original games from not only Uncharted 1, but Crash Bandicoot, that like they've evolved their games. They've maintained it.
I feel like Naughty Dog is one of the, probably the only example, and Sony Santa Monica. Yeah. They're the only examples, but are people really going to want to stay put for 10, 20 years,
No, of
even if
course
people
not.
are, if like the studio is successful? Like, I forgot the girl who made Uncharted, but
Amy Henning.
yeah, she left and now she's doing Captain America's because people are going to want to do different things too. So, I can't necessarily blame the people for like leaving Bioware. And,
Sure.
studios are going to have a lot of people coming in and out.
There's
Um,
churn always.
yeah, but I guess like the biggest point is like there has to be quality control,
Yeah.
and regardless of who's leaving and who's coming, and it's just sad to see when like that quality control doesn't last.
So then, in terms of quality control, do you put a date and a limit now to Mass Effect and tell the developers and say you have 2 years to finish this up and get it
No,
out the door,
no, I
or
would
do you
not
give
do
them a
that.
complete freedom and say, hey, when you tell us when it's ready and we'll ship whatever you
Well,
release?
first off, I think any creative project, if you do that, if there's no deadlines, then you're setting up that team for failure. I
Right.
don't think there's any creative project that you can release well if there's no pressure to deliver in a certain time frame. Because a lot of times, I mean, at least most of the creative types I talk to, like, they're just going to get lost in their creativity, and
Yeah.
they're not going to really, like, think about these grounded things. So you really need both. Like you need good management and then good creative inspiration. I think the biggest thing for like the direction of what the new game is going to be like, the new Mass Effect is going to be budget. Like I think that's the bigger question. Like, are you going to do like $100 million budget? $50 million budget? That that might mean that you could be less heavy handed, give them more time. If you're investing like 150, $200 million, like something crazy like that,
Yeah.
then really you're gonna want to be very heavy handed. Then you're gonna want to say no, like you have to meet these expectations and this deadline and stuff like that. And you know honestly, like as much as I would love, like just a quadruple A Mass Effect, unless I think you can bring some of those old writers back and the old directors, or you find people who are that equally good, I think that you should just deliver like a game with a smaller budget and a
That's what I was
smaller
gonna say.
scope.
I want a smaller scoped game. So like give them just 100 million. Say, hey, again, I want this game to be 30 hours long, not 60 or 50 or 80. And then if it does well, like yeah, make a sequel that's a little larger because you now know that like you can take the gamble. It's also funny. Some of the veterans that left Bioware are making that sci-fi game that's coming out
Well,
soon.
I'm happy you brought that up too because like people just hype up like the person who made that project. They're like, oh yeah, you have this one Mass Effect writer and this
Right.
Mass Effect person, but like even when they go to make new studios, that doesn't always translate into a good
Most of them
game.
haven't.
Like I just played Internal Strands and I was really hyped up for that game, and they're like, oh man, it was gonna be like a Bioware killer. And I played it and I was like, yeah, like
Yeah.
there's some good elements of it, but man, it's janky. Like
Yeah.
the animations are terrible,
Right.
and it's just I don't think I can play the whole thing. Like to me, like I think a 7 out of 10 is totally appropriate. And if I didn't have like games like Avowed on the horizon, I would probably play Eternal Strands. But right now, I don't think I'm going to get back into it. And I say that because like it's kind of the same narrative. It's like, oh man, like Bioware is dead, all the good people left because they hate Bioware because Bioware sucks.
Mm.
But they might not necessarily make amazing projects in the new places they go to,
Yeah,
right?
it's not
it's
guaranteed.
it's not guaranteed. So it's like, you know, like Bioware downsizing doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. It doesn't have to necessarily mean oh they're gutted and over. It's all a matter of like who is going to be taking the helm from here.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's funny again. You mentioned that, like Ted, now that he's announced his retirement from Insomniac, he's like, I have three people taking over for me. It might not be one, but I think these three are the most positioned to be successful and to continue to drive this company towards a successful future. So you're right; it's all about who you have that takes over, and if you're confident with that talent, then great. But it comes back to leadership; they have to find the
Yeah,
right people.
but if I had to be a betting man, I would say that the future doesn't look that bright. I would agree with you on that. Even though I want the future to be bright, if I had to be a betting man, I would say yeah,
So you
probably
think the
not.
game releases?
Mass Effect,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah. I mean, they're trying to go into TV as well. There's no way they're not going to release another Mass Effect game. But the question is, you make a good question. Is it going to be Bioware or is it going to be another studio?
Yeah.
And I think it's all going to be a matter of budget and how things are progressing. I think it's impossible for us to speculate now. 2 years from now, we'll know better, because you have to give them a chance to do something.
They gave him so many chances to make Dragon Age and Anthem.
Yeah, yeah, Arjun.
I'm just saying. How many more chances do you want to give
Yeah, I mean,
him?
I think also it's a matter of expectations, right? Like people expected such a high bar for those games, right? And they didn't deliver. Now people are probably gonna not expect the same high bar for Mass Effect.
That I wouldn't. Look, you released Mass Effect Andromeda, not good. Anthem, not good. Dragon Age, debatable, but not good. I don't know. So like three that's three times like three strikes, man. Like I don't understand. A fourth you want to give him a fourth chance? I don't know, man.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see, we'll
It's
see.
like saying that Halo 4, 5, and Infinite were shit, which they kind of were. Would you want them to make a new Halo game? I don't know.
But I guess like that's where we disagree because I think there's a difference between like a game that's objectively bad and a game that's debatable. You know, like Anthem, objectively bad.
Okay.
Andromeda,
It
objectively
could be
bad.
bad.
Veilguard, debatable. I would say good. Other people would say
Okay.
bad.
So two in the
And
negative,
so
two one in the
and
middle.
so with Halo, you know, like I would say 4, 5, and Infinite are all debatable.
Fair.
I think none of them are just objectively terrible, but it's the narrative that surrounds that because
Yeah.
it's like you had this nostalgia of like, oh, you need a 10 out of 10 cream of the crop game because that's what we used to have and we're just not getting them. And so you're constantly chasing like the shadow of what you used to be. And like, that's just like a death prophecy. It's like a
Yeah.
death spiral in a way. Like, you know, you look at like, you know, the studios that are like doing amazing right now, like Larian or Kingdom Comes, you know, studio and stuff like that.
Yeah.
People, you know, the things people hype up. How are people going to talk about them 10 years from now or
Yeah.
15 years? Like, look at the way we're talking about Sony. You know, like we were so happy with Sony, and now me and you
Yeah.
are like, you know, kind of chilling out. We're like, what's going on? You know,
Yeah.
look at the way people are talking about Naughty Dog. So it's like I feel like success with it like brings like you know kind of like a death spiral, and I
It
feel like the
does.
only one who's really been good at avoiding that has been Naughty Dog and Santa Monica, and that's
They
only because like when they were on their cusp of like dealing with those type of things, they found a way to pivot and persevere.
Yeah, well, Naughty Dog gets a ton of grace and the benefit of the doubt anytime they release a game because rightfully so, the last five
Oh
plus
yeah,
games they've released have all been great. So even if this new game by them isn't is debatable, like you said, I'm still gonna actually try it. Like it would have been the opposite if their last five games were not delivering to some extent to me and speaking to me in any fashion. Even objectively, if the performance wasn't good or writing was objectively bad, but no, they have delivered. So even though I don't like Last of Us as much as you do, I can objectively say it's a well
yeah,
written game. So that's why they get so much more grace. Bioware doesn't get the grace now anymore because they've now released three games that are all almost bad in the sense.
yeah. I mean, I think it sucks to me to see like you know any really legendary studio just kind of going through the ringer, you know,
Yeah.
going through the churner. So
Well, you know what? When
I'll be hoping for the best. We'll see.
what I here's what I can say. The optimistic side of me is when one developer or studio dies, another shall rise in its ashes. So there will one day be another studio from a different publisher, from a different group
That fills that
that
niche.
fills that niche. So well, I'm not too worried.
Yeah, but then it's like it's the franchise. You know what I mean? It's like the tie you have to Mass Effect. Like someone, you know, if Bioware dies, you know, there will be another studio that does Bioware games,
Right.
right? I mean, like Larian could probably make Bioware
Yeah,
games
I
if
can
they
see
wanted
that.
to do it. They just that's not their type of game. You
Right.
know, they don't like action RPGs. But then, you know, they'll probably make their own franchise, you know,
Yeah,
and
I
then
can
you're
see
not going
that.
to have those memories with Mass Effect. The death of the nostalgia.
Yeah, it's definitely nostalgia. But besides that, I don't really have much else to talk about. Anything else you wanted to talk about?
Well, I guess like one thing I wanted to talk about was just Game Pass in general and like kind of the games that we have look forward to. And I think one of the things I've really been liking about Xbox's strategy, and I think it just kind of like resonated and hit me now, is that like they've really diversified like their offerings and in the fact that like you have their first party games, right? And then you have their like mainstream first party stuff, right? Like Call of Duty, Activision Blizzard and stuff, but man, they're really getting good at these like gems, you know, that are like kind of overperforming. So for instance, like I was just talking about Internal Strands, like, you know, for me that's a 7 out of 10 game, right? But you get enough of those 7 out of 10 and 8 out of 10 games, and they start adding up. You know, like you know, I would say Far Cry. You know, what is it, New Age on its
Yeah, yeah.
own, or Far Cry 6. Like
You
people
know.
aren't gonna get hyped for it. You know, but when you already have like a banger coming out every 2 months, and now you're interspersing like other 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10 games, like it really kind of just buoys up the whole service. And I feel like Microsoft's been slowly toiling away at that, and you know, it just kind of hit me like I was showing you that video for like Wu Chang, right? And like a lot of these like Korean developers, these Chinese developers, they're really making these gems, and they're probably making them for low budgets. And it's nice that like
Or
as
subsidies from their government.
yeah, yeah, probably. And it's nice that like as I'm waiting for like, these big marquee titles, like I can just hop on a Game Pass and have something like that.
Yeah.
And then I was even looking at like some of the new drops, like they got that Citizen Sleeper game too, right?
Right.
Not my, genre at all, but it's scoring well. It's like
Yeah.
an 86,
Yeah.
that's pretty good. Last year they had like indies that really outperformed, like look at Dungeons of Hindenburg.
Yeah.
Like people really love that. So I'm really
And they're gonna
curious.
get, aren't they gonna get Brawlhalla or whatever that game's
Yeah,
called?
I don't even know that.
Yeah.
So, and it's like a lot of these like games that like kind of go under the radar, but they're really expanding the portfolio, right? And like now, like platformers, like okay, you've got Spyro trilogy, you've got Crash Bandicoot trilogy, but now even a game like maybe it's that cognitive bias, but even a game like Lucky's Tale, I'm like, oh man, that's like another game on the service.
Yeah.
Like if all you have is 7 out of 10s, then you're like doom and gloom. But if you have a lot of 9 out of 10s, or you're starting to get them, and now you're buoyed up by these sevens, the sevens don't seem so bad.
Yeah.
So I guess like it might seem like kind of a weird thing to say, but like I feel like I'm starting to see that strategy, right? Where it's
It's
like
playing out now.
it's starting to play out, and like if you think about it, like you know, especially some of these games, like if you're not going for like triple A games that have the best graphics, right? Like kind of like more indie games with like that fill in certain niche, it actually ages better. It matures better, right?
Okay.
Like when you have these cell shaded games or these Metroidvania type games, even if people are looking at that game 5 or 6 years later,
Right.
like Vampire Survivors, like that's another little gem you can start adding on to
Yeah.
your portfolio.
I think again the value proposition of Game Pass, it's not only just about how much you get for the subscription. It does a lot for creative developers to say, let me get my game across to a broader audience, when in the past I would not have been able to. It would have flown under the radar. So this is why Game Pass is so good and much better than PlayStation and their subscription services, is it encourages people to just be creative and say, we'll highlight it. It's just like
Yeah.
Steam, where and on the Steam store, you can pay for a big banner, an ad that will showcase on the front store page. And it's like kind of doing that with Game Pass, like, hey, there's this small, very gem coming out, try it out. Where else would you get that exposure?
Yeah, yeah. And it's kind of interesting when I like compare the strategy between like Sony and Microsoft, because one thing I've always been really critical of Microsoft for, I'm like, man, you have like kind of these gems, but you don't really advertise them that much.
Right.
And maybe they're trying to save on marketing dollars, but like things like Warhammer Dark Tide, like that kind of went under the radar, even
Yeah.
though it scored pretty well. It was a pretty good game. You tried that out for a bit, but like people were really talking about it,
Yeah.
and I bet your butt, you say a Baja Blast, like if Sony had the marketing rights for that, they would have really hyped that up into like a whole event. So I guess in a way, like what I used to like crap on Microsoft for is slowly starting to change my opinion. Like, don't get me wrong, I still think Sony does a better job of hyping up their third parties,
Yeah.
their little
Yeah, they
gems.
still do. Yeah.
Microsoft still could do a better job of that, and I feel like what they did with what is it, the Expedition game?
Expedition 33.
Like that's the right route to go. Like you really want to make those feel like marquee titles, right?
Right.
So there's some improvement there, but even if Microsoft kind of fumbled the marketing for a lot of these little gems, there's enough of them that like the service is really starting to feel more padded out. And I guess that makes me think of like the two games we were just talking about, Wu Chang and Phantom Blade Zero. And yeah, I think they're both being made by Chinese developers, and wow, they're looking really promising, like both of them. And Wu Chang for me, like that one, I can really appreciate because that's a game that was kind of going under the radar, and I said the term, I don't mean this offensive, but like bottom of the barrel to me, meaning that like when I looked at 2025, I look at the games that I'm so hyped for and the quality of those games. Like I thought of Wu Chang as an afterthought, but now that I'm looking more at the gameplay, the mechanics, the story, I'm like, oh my god, this is shooting up like right into like the top of the list. Like I'm super hyped for this, and it's like Microsoft did an amazing job with that, with like finding a game that might seem like it's more under the radar, but man, it's like really high quality.
Let's just talk about this too, because it is interesting. That's not a coincidence, but yes, there's very talented looking and great looking games coming out of Asia, but the fact that Microsoft has re-engaged that region. Like,
Oh yeah,
it's not a coincidence that they're now saying we want a Ninja Gaiden, we want from
oh yeah.
Japan, we want Wu Chang, we want
They're trying to get those
Wolong.
gamers, yeah,
All
because they gave up on those gamers. And
yeah,
I'm happy you brought that up because I think if you look at the console sales, like even though Xbox is all doom and gloom, like they're actually still selling pretty well in
yeah,
North America.
yeah, well, okay, there's a decline every quarter, like
True.
year over year,
But
but
like overall sales, like where Microsoft is getting beat in North America, like pretty bad. But where
yeah,
they're getting demolished is Asia and Europe.
yeah.
Like,
So, well, let's not forget that there's a very actually small presence for all three OEMs in their in Asia. Like, it's as weird as it is.
oh
Like,
yeah,
PlayStation 5 and Switch don't sell extremely well even in Asia too. That's only like a couple
well,
million
that's because they're
units.
so mobile, you know.
Yeah, they're so mobile. But I want to like give credit again to Phil because this was probably his directive to say we still want to encourage development out of this region, even though we don't sell well. But we know that that market for games that
They
they
didn't give up
make.
on it. I felt like they had given up on it after Hi-Fi
Yeah,
Rush.
but what I was going to say is that market for games of those caliber is still appealing to people in Europe and in North America. So it's like there's still an appetite for it. And
Yeah.
they want everyone to have a place to play it. And if they can expand it to PC as well. So, like, if you got, what's the game that you have, Wukong, right, that
Yeah.
you're just playing? Sold better on PC
Oh,
than
it
it did
sounds amazing.
PlayStation. But maybe when Ninja Gaiden comes out or Wu Chang, maybe it might sell just as well on PC
Yeah.
as it does on the Xbox platform. So, again, just the fact that they've just said we're still going to go
Yeah,
all
you
in
never
on
know what's
everything.
gonna, sell like hotcakes on the PC.
Yeah, I don't know. I Again, this is one pivot I can give credit Phil for. He's talked about it. His first 5 years of his tenure did not deliver on it.
I wonder if they're gonna start acquiring, and Sony too. I wonder if they're gonna start acquiring Korean and Chinese developers.
I don't know. I
Because look,
think
I mean, Lies of P was a banger that came out of
it
Korea, right? Pal
was.
World, pretty. I mean, not for us, but banger, right?
Yeah, I feel like they're okay with subsidizing the cost of the development through these initiatives and programs. It's I forgot what they're called. They're called like the Hero Initiative or something weird where they will give some money to the developer. The developer itself, especially when they're in China, gets money from the government as well. I don't know. There's probably a lot going on there where they might not be able to buy the companies. It's probably something weird like that. And there's a lot of politics around that. But can they keep coming back saying we'll keep subsidizing more games because they're selling so well? Like someone's going to come back to the Wukong developers and say we want a sequel,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
and someone's going to subsidize that cost. So the first time through, maybe it was all like a mess, and it was all because there was talks about it being timed exclusive for some PlayStation, then an actual exclusive, and it was like
Well,
no, none
now
of
that
that
you bring
happened.
it up, it is kind of interesting because a lot of these like double A games that are coming off looking as good as like triple A really polished games, they're kind of coming from like Korea and China. Like,
Yeah.
Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, I don't know where that studio is that makes it. I kind of feel like they're from Europe because it's
Yeah,
so
probably.
British. But,
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like that's kind of the exception because, like, man, they like hit it out of the ballpark, right? But, like, now that I look back at the last couple of years, like, really those like massive hits that we didn't necessarily expect I
Yeah.
feel like they're coming from Korea and
Yeah,
China.
100%. I mean, I'm also excited because I think there's an initiative in India that's been established, and like there's going to be a game coming out of a program from there soon. So hopefully it's like a
Oh, I
really good
wonder what
game.
that's gonna look like.
Yeah,
Don't they have like an Indian anime as well, like the first
they
one ever
do.
or something like
Yeah.
that?
So like they're going, man. Like my cousin actually worked, I think, for Rockstar in India a couple of years
It's
ago.
crazy.
So I don't know if he was working on like Red Dead at the time, but it was like very
I
interesting.
mean,
It's
I
just
feel
like
like that would be a market where you could actually make games for pretty cheap, right? And like everyone knows English in
yeah,
India, right?
everyone
Like I
is
feel like
yeah.
that is like the a
Well,
really good idea to make a
also
studio there.
also for your development pipeline it makes sense because you can work around the clock 24/7. So when your American
Oh
counterparts are going to
yeah.
sleep, that's when India is waking up. So you say continue what we left off with. You might not give them all the responsibilities that you would have with the creative decisions, but you go, we just need people with manpower to just start
Oh yeah. And if you dipped
cranking
into
out
like
defects and bugs and software
and if
development.
I feel like if you dipped into like Indian mythology and stuff like
Oh
that,
my
oh, you would
god,
make some amazing stuff.
Hanuman, you got so
And
many
this
different.
is kind of really random, but I don't know if you ever heard of Bloodywood.
No.
Okay, so they're like a, I think I sent you a video link of it, but probably I sent you so much stuff you didn't notice it. But so they are a metal Indian band, right?
Really,
And yeah, they're like, from New Delhi, and they're like properly like metal, like
that's been
yeah,
interesting.
screamo, all that, and they're actually like really good. And I was like, watching a lot of like Americans and stuff like reacting to them, and my wife finds that hilarious. She's like,
That's
"Why are you
so
doing that?"
funny.
But I bring it up because they just did like a feature, I think, with maybe like a year ago in the last year. with this Japanese band. It's like a girl band, rock metal band. I
Oh
think it's
yeah,
called like
those two. Yeah,
baby
yeah,
something,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it's like anime. And it's like you have like metal Indian music
With like Japanese
mixed with
metal.
Japanese like synth like poppy female singers,
Okay,
and it's like the videos anime style, and I'm like, oh my god, this is like the fusion I didn't even know I wanted.
that's so
So I
funny.
say that because like it's almost like we're reaching this like this point where all these different cultures across the world are all kind of getting into the same stuff, and they're
Yeah.
all getting into the same room.
Yeah, that's the nice thing. Again, that wasn't like the case the last 10 or 20 years.
Yeah.
So it's just to see the diversity, the cultures coming together and giving people opportunities. People that I said would slide under the radar that you never knew had the talent in these other regions. And you're like, yeah, let's get your stuff onto this platform. So it's great overall for the
Yeah.
industry. So
And the reason I wanted to bring it up is because like, and Phantom Blade Zero, I just watched that gameplay video with you, for the first time, and I think when I first saw the trailer, I was like, "Ah, man, another like Asian game. It feels like it's a dime a dozen. Like, ah, do I really want to play
yeah,
this?" And now I'm watching more and more of this game, and I'm like, "Dang, like they're really delivering. Like
yeah,
this looks dope. Like I think." And I have a feeling Sony's gonna really hype that game up.
oh
Just
yeah,
like they hyped up like Stellar Blade, like they're
yes.
really gonna hype that game up.
Well, they have a keen eye to find these types of gems again because when they found Celebrate, I'm like, that game never comes out. When they first showed it off, I'm like, it looks so good. And obviously, the game changed so much since its
Mm.
initial unveiling, but they still went forward through it. And I think Sony developed,
Sony
or
does
some,
an amazing job of knowing what's a Sony game. Even if they
yes,
didn't make a Sony game, they can like just
this speaks
spot
to our
it. Like
fans.
this is what our
And
fans want.
and I think they ended up helping the Stellar Blade developers to the finish line in developing
Yeah,
and
and they got
polishing
that
up the
quality
game
control and all
and the
that. Yeah,
quality control. So I think they're going to do the same with this
yeah, and
to
I
help them
feel
get it
like
to the finish
that's gonna
line.
help them like pad out the year because like we talked about, like I think this year is going to be Death Stranding 2, right?
Yep, I
And
think in a
Ghost of
couple months.
Yotai, right? And
Yeah,
later in the year. And then you have Phantom Blade, like overperforming, let's say,
yeah.
and like basically, selling and having the same type of attention as like a first party like Sony game. And this year is going to feel stacked for Sony, and people are going to walk away happy because it's like somehow Sony manages like to make their fan base happy by the end of the year.
Yeah.
And by the end
It's
of the
the
year,
last
everyone
second.
is always like, man, Sony did again. They
Yeah.
delivered. Somehow
Yeah.
they delivered. Like
When
I went
all
into 2024 skeptical, like, oh man, Sony's not delivering this
yeah,
year, and they
that's
found a way.
well, when all hope seems lost, they seem to pull a hat trick out. So, again, I think I might have mentioned this earlier, but Tom Henderson is saying that a new game from an unannounced studio, so the studio hasn't even been unveiled yet, will announce their new project at the Sony State of Play. I won't be surprised if it's a second party studio in collaboration and it's going to be some banger of a game. Like, watch it be that case. And that's what Tom Henderson was kind of alluding to. Like, the project looked really good. So, we'll
Yeah.
see.
Okay, and I know we've been going on for a while, but I just wanted to pivot a little bit because we want to cover a little bit more than just video games, right? We want to talk about TV shows and anime and things like that. So I know you've probably been watching a little bit more stuff than I have,
Mm-hmm.
because I think the only thing I've been watching lately is Severance, and I know you just watched the first two episodes of that too, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, like what have you been watching? What have you been enjoying?
Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah, there's a couple things I'll try to make it quick here, but so I started watching Severance season two. I got into the first two episodes. I've been enjoying it. We talked about this a little earlier about how in two episodes it's literally the same thing but at a different perspective. So I don't know how many episodes there are for this season, and I hope it progresses much faster as we get through this season because if they do it this way, not a whole lot's going to happen. And then I don't know if there's going to be a season three or not. I think with how popular it is, though, they'll continue the show. I'm liking it though. I like the pace. Like there's something to be said about how skeptical the show is and how like it keeps you in very much suspense. And then every angle that they're trying to tackle is like, okay, well, what's really going on here? Can you trust anything that's being said? It's actually interesting because they have a scene, I think in episode two or one, where they're like, hey, we made a new break room. There's no microphones. You can talk here. You'll be safe. But is that really the case? Like that just encompasses the whole show about the secrecy and the suspense parts. Like we don't really trust that there's microphones here. I like that they're doubling down on what made the show pretty great in the first season. And then besides that, I've been watching Solo Leveling season two, which I think season two has been way better than season one. This is what reminds me of the manhwa, like what I imagined the show would look like. The pacing has been a lot better, and I know the writing isn't good at all. It's very typical shonen. But I think this is what we've needed in the anime industry. Like it's always two extremes. It's either this like really complex anime like Attack on Titan that's just, oh my god, this is the best anime ever
Yeah,
released.
because the story is just like so unique
Yeah,
and
so
like
so unique.
yeah, but you
Or
really have to be like paying attention.
yeah, or you get these weird animes that might have decent action, but literally no story. There's a lot of what you call like fan service, and then there's like no meat to it. Like there's no substance. This is the perfect middle ground where there's not that much fan service. They'll do some stuff here and there, but overall, like they're progressing towards a specific objective. And they'll get there within 48 episodes, and it will conclude, and it will be great because the
I
animations have
mean,
been
I
phenomenal.
really do like the shorter animes, and I guess for me, like after I finished watching Dandadan, like I just really haven't watched any anime, and I just feel like it's harder for me to get into like shonen type anime. And I watched Solo Leveling. Like I think I only got up to like episode 7 of the first season, and I was like, "This is kind of interesting. Like fights are good. The story's kind of interesting." But then he just like seemed to just get so crazy powerful, and I was just all right. I feel like I'm watching Superman, but like
Yeah.
there's no kryptonite. Like and then like there was this one episode where it kind of seemed like he was in a dungeon that was like hell based and it was all fiery, and I was like, all right, okay, why am I watching this? It's gonna just destroy everything. So,
Yeah, I mean
but I've been hearing
the
really good things about season 2 just across the board.
yeah,
So
so the last episode, which was by far the best episode in the whole series, it crashed all of Crunchyroll servers, including the
really,
yeah. There's a really popular piracy website that you can use to watch for free. That also crashed a bunch of their servers. That's how good. Like, and this is crazy. So I did
so
some
do you
research.
feel like it's like the biggest anime right now?
Oh yeah, 100%. Their post that they put on Crunchyroll's website got 100,000 likes within a day. Like that's
That's
the most they've ever
crazy.
had. So here's a couple of things I did. I did some research into it. They always release the key animators and directors just before the episode releases. They don't even have their top tier animators yet doing an episode for the season. So there's 2 more episodes. Apparently, they're going to have amazing animations, and they're saving their A-list
Oh,
animators for. So this episode was so good by their B tier animators. I was shocked how good it was that I can't wait till the end of the season. I think there's 6 episodes left. So I'm just hyped there. The second thing is related to the show. I was kind of thinking about it too. It's like he kind of feels like Superman, but if I had to compare this to another anime that was similar, it was One Punch Man. But One Punch Man has been so much worse because I feel like Saitama became comedic relief to the
yeah.
point where like
Well, I feel like
you
that's
could
kind of like the hook of One Punch Man because like the action is kind of cool and it's like the side characters and seeing how they
yeah,
progress. But Saitama is
he just
just
comes in to save the day
yeah,
all the
it's just a
time.
satire. Like the
Yeah,
whole point of him is he's
it's
a
a satire.
satire.
Yeah, and I okay, there's something to be said about that. Like it's great in it of its sense, but it's not a phenomenal
Yeah.
anime by any means. With this, there's at least progression, and I know that by the time they get to the middle of the series, there will be a moment where he finally loses. It only happens once, and it's the climax, but it's okay